I'm so sorry I'm late. I thought it was the easiest way of getting here on time, but obviously it's a rather willful machine. So it's a very rainy February day. There's a sort of road up there, which is where some of the time when I was here, my mum would walk me, and I used to tell her stories on the way over. Sometimes they were based on other things. I remember giving her a serialization of the entire script of the first Star Wars movie whilst walking over, because I'd seen it so many times I knew the dialogue back to front. The thing that my mum says that was my kind of particular evil genius as a young boy wasn't so much the fact I would tell her these stories on this 10-15 minute walk to school. It was the fact that when we'd got to the end, I would give her a quiz on all the details of the story, so she couldn't just switch off and ignore me and just go, yep, John, yep, that's fine. She would have to listen to my banal, rather nonsensical stories. Yeah, then I would go in there, and yeah, my main thing when I was at school was I was good at English. I liked doing, and mainly the writing stories aspect of it. They were always surprisingly violent, because I was watching, Doctor Who and Star Wars, and it was always things where people would die and get killed all the time. Literally, see at the bottom of the road, that's my infant school at the bottom of the road. And that does just suggest that it's not very far at all. But yeah, so that's the infant school down at the bottom of the hill. I don't even remember that one. I remember making sort of pasta-shaped pictures that you'd glue pasta onto pieces of paper and paint it, because it's one of those things that you do at an infant school where you kind of largely afterwards go, why did I do that? I suppose learning the basics. I don't quite... it's afterwards you think, I don't quite understand the logic of an infant school. Yeah, so this is Chapel Road, as you can see, which is where I go. Again, it looks so short. The bottom of the hill there used to be somebody I played with down there, I seem to remember. There was one up there. And it seemed like a massive distance away. And these houses look so much bigger. Mine was that one, I say mine, my parents' one, number 20. It looks really nice now. It's kind of hard to, that whole sort of bit looks quite sort of neat and modern and clean. I don't think that my dad was an environmental health officer. He'd never have let it get too dirty. But it all looks so kind of bizarrely new to me. If you know what I mean, it's like got new doors and everything has been sort of like crisply repaired relatively recently. That it's like that thing of people say, repairing a broom. Do you replace the brushes and then replace the handle? Is it still the same broom? And that's the house in the same location, but there's so much of it that's changed, I imagine. But on the purely nerdy level, that would have been where I first ever saw Doctor Who, in that room right there, because that's where we had the TV. Yeah, back in about 1981 or whenever it was. I can't remember which house it was. I think it might have been like the third one along there. Basically, there was a few Autons left over from one of the invasions, and they just tried to sort of rehabilitate them into society, and they moved in with I think they were fostered by a regular family up there. It just didn't end very well. I wrote a lot of sketches for a Radio 4 sketch show called Recorded for Training Purposes, which I sort of won a competition, and the prize was to do more work. And I ended up writing for about 3 series of that. It was largely a sort of a new writer show, and then after about 3 series, they thought, well, they've done 3 series, they're not really new writers anymore, so we might move on to other people. Being a writer, you're so much more in control. Obviously, you are sort of playing all the parts in your head, and you're creating it and discovering the story anew. I'd say the writing is obviously more difficult because you have to draw everything out of your head, and that's incredibly rewarding because the joy of discovering something when all the pieces come together on the page. I always liken it to being a puzzle, where you've got a vague idea of what you want to write about it, and it's just figuring out what order you put it in to make the story work in its best possible way. Whereas to play it, somebody's already done all that work for you, but it's again a bit more direct, and you are very directly interacting with the audience, and if it's funny then they're laughing back and you're getting a lot more back, whereas obviously when you're a writer you're largely just sat in your room not speaking to people and just focusing in, and it's much more sociable. I did realise I spent most of last year on a tour, and when I got back, I think the weekend afterwards I was writing, and I spent the entire 2 days on my own in the flat and realised I'm going slowly crazy because I don't see other people, and I've discovered I need to sort of go out and meet people and speak to people just in order to refresh the brain a little bit. I suppose that's the main difference. It's a social thing in a weird way. So, I can't go out for a drink with my colleagues when I've been writing at home, because obviously that's just drinking alone, and that's not a good thing. One, never be too worried about the medium, in the sense, I think a lot of times people will say, this could only work on audio for a particular idea, and I kind of go, I don't necessarily feel that's exciting in itself, because of course it can only work on audio. You're doing audio, you're actually making your job easier in a weird way. So if you're writing like having a blind character in it, people have to describe things to him, and it feels like it's a little bit lazy. I like to write something where people will say, but hold on, that can't work on audio, surely that's impossible to do. So there was one I wrote recently where I think I got the note back from the BBC when we submitted the storyline for approval to them. They were saying, is the ending of this going to work? It's largely people in a room writing things down on a piece of paper. And I was going, yeah, it will. I know what I'm going to do with that. It's not an inherently audio idea. At the same time, it is always worth thinking about the soundscape. Dialogue-wise, it's one of the skills you learn very quickly doing is writing dialogue where you can give the visual information people need and the exposition people need very quickly and very clearly without them noticing and without it feeling forced. And I've found loads of ways of doing that, and it's things like jokes is a great way of covering it, and puns and plays on words. So I think there was one I did, actually this was a script editing one, where I put in as a description somebody had two people having a fight and you hear a noise, and then the doctor says, well, I usually only metaphorically pull the rug out from under people, which visually explains what it is. And I think there's another one where it's important that people know there are three of this particular monster, and the doctor has a line about saying, there's you wait all day for a pantophagon and three turn up at once, and it's making some kind of reference or some kind of joke to cover the information and make it feel like it's something somebody would naturally say, or they describe something and make a sarcastic comment about it. Try to think orally, really, and think and kind of, well, it's sort of almost what you'd expect. Don't worry too much about the visuals, but don't worry about making it too radio. I always consider myself whatever I'm doing at any given point. If I kind of had to pick one to do till the end of time, I would probably go for writer, just on the basis that I think I fill more of a gap there. I think if I kind of quit acting, somebody else would come along and fill what I did relatively easily. But as a writer, I think I've got a more distinct way of looking at the world. But I kind of I wouldn't really want to quit either of them, because each one sort of feels like it's a break from the other one. So when I was doing this tour, I was writing during the day and acting in the evening for 6 months. And I never got bored of either, because each one felt like it was a break, because I wasn't doing the actual work. So it kind of worked out all right for me. Coming up with the notion for a plot that's something that somebody hasn't done before and that's going to be fun and interesting and exciting, that's always the tricky part for me. Writing the actual script, writing the dialogue is sort of a doddle once you've got over that, and then structuring the plot. All of that, the initial stages are tricky, but then actually just writing it is the easy part. But the idea is you kind of just have to have your mind open to it, really. You're always kind of looking for an angle on something, or your brain's always slightly ticking over. And it's why it's often useful to go for a walk or have a swim, just because it's something where you've got not much else to think about. It's why, actually, to be honest, the rise of your iPhone or whatever is possibly damaging to a writer, because if you're just walking somewhere, you can be checking your phone all the time now, and just rather than actually letting your mind tick over and try and come up with ideas for things. Often one of the good places for coming up with ideas, I find, is watching bad plays or bad television programmes, because you just slightly switch off and go, well, either your brain just is trying to find more interesting things to do, or more interesting ways of playing the bit in whatever you're watching. I was born in Epping and sort of brought up in Epping about the first 10 years of my life, and mainly sort of lived down the road. I'd come to the library a lot and get loads and loads of books out of the library. And I've popped back in here relatively recently, and I will occasionally just sort of sit in here and do some work. I think there was one day when I was having my car having an MOT just up the road, but actually, as it turned out, by quite a bad garage. And I just spent the best part of an afternoon here writing in the library, just for the sheer joy of it, just to actually sort of come back to the place. I use people's surnames because I have no imagination for names at any point. So almost everyone I have in a story is named after someone, because I meet a lot of people by doing both the acting and the writing. That off the top of my head, there was a couple of Australian comedians who I know called Celia Paquola and Kelly Festuca, one of whom lives and works in New York and one of whom lives and works in Melbourne. And in fact, actually, Celia has won various awards, like the Australian equivalent of a BAFTA, for a show called Utopia, which you can watch on Netflix. And they became two Roman soldiers in a story called Wrath of the Iceni, called Festucus and Paquolus, because they were both of vaguely Italian families, and I couldn't think of actual authentic Italian-sounding names, so I stole those, and then pretty much everyone else ever since. And I know it's going to sound like it's the politically correct answer, but I can't really pick a favourite. I mean, I love them all in different ways. As I say, Tom, I just think is terrific to work with. And Peter Davison was the one I sort of grew up watching. So he always has a special place in my heart. And he's just a great fun in the room. It's interesting working with him and his companions because they almost feel like they are exactly the same as the parts as they are off. And, you can have a slightly dry, combative relationship between Peter and Janet, who played Tegan, one of his companions, and Sarah, who played another companion called Nissa, acting as a sort of almost a peacemaker. But it's all with humour and fun, and he's one of the ones I really enjoy writing. Colin is just such a good radio actor, and I really love with Colin that he's been sort of really embraced by fandom. I always loved the Sixth Doctor when he was on TV. Again, I was growing up as a kid. I love the character. I love Colin's performance, but not everyone seemed to get him. But suddenly on audio, everyone went, "Oh, he's brilliant, this guy, isn't he?" And finally, everyone's understood how good the Sixth Doctor is when they're not distracted by the costume. And Sylvester again, really creative, really fun. Always just a joy to have in the green room, and so he's great. And again, Paul is full-on professional actor. Paul McGann. He's actually, oddly enough, I find with him that Paul I write almost exactly the same as I write Tom. In most of the time, the actors and the doctors have a very distinct voice, but I've noticed that I could pretty much take a Tom line and give it to Paul, and they'd be able to do it. Whereas I don't think any of the others I could interchange to the same degree. Everyone would have a different tone. I think the one I struggle to write, if any of them, is probably Colin. I've only done 1 and a bit stories with Colin, and that's not because of him, but it's because it was one I was really anticipating, enjoying writing, but then I couldn't quite get my head around him. I find he's a less jokey Doctor when I write him. All of the others, I kind of can turn over gags quite quickly, but I think that there's a degree to which the Sixth Doctor, he says less actual jokes, but what he says is kind of funny in terms of how the gap between him and reality, and it sort of happens in the pauses between lines. It's a weird, it's kind of hard to describe, but he was the one I kind of struggled to write. But and John Hurt, I should mention as well, because I've written for John Hurt, who is obviously a legend. Again, really lovely to write for, really lovely man, and not starry at all, despite the fact you're working with someone who's like been in Indiana Jones films and Aliens films, and just really down to earth and lovely man. There should always be that pressure, regardless of who you're writing for. You kind of want to write the scripts to be the best they can possibly be. There is, I suppose, a degree to which I kind of find it more with the companions in a weird way, because if you've got John Hurt, or if you've got the Doctor in a story, the Doctor is always going to be a huge and compelling character, and you're going to write him all the clever lines and all the funny lines, and the pressure is always on making sure that the companion has as much to do, particularly in some cases because, we've been working with Paul McGann, where his companions are Hattie Morahan and Nicola Walker, and Hattie's played leads at the National Theatre. Nicola is, whilst we're speaking, on Broadway in an Arthur Miller play, playing Mark Strong's wife. They are some of the best actors this country has, and you don't want to just have them saying, "What's going on, Doctor? Here's your screwdriver." You don't want to keep them saying that, because if you've got actors that good, you kind of want to give them stuff to do. So I'm very consciously aware of trying to make sure that they have stuff that's worthy of their talent. So I think the last one I did, I wrote these hugely emotional scenes for both of them. One of which was sort of based around, because my father passed away about 1.5 years ago, and I was determined I was going to write something about him eventually, and I'd largely given that stuff to Nicola, because I know she'll deliver it brilliantly, and it's the best tribute I can give to my dad, is to sort of write a play for him with one of the best actors in the country. So that's, I would say, is more of the pressure. I mean, yes, you do want to get it right, and you do want to write material that's good for them, but that's almost always going to happen with the Doctor anyway, as long as it's a good story. Yeah. I have a very good marker for when I started writing the audios, because it's almost precisely like about 4 months before my nephew was born, and my nephew's coming up to 7. So I've been doing it for about 7 years. The first year, very piecemeal. Actually, that's not entirely true, because I think the very first one I did, that I don't entirely think of as being part of the same set. It was a Sapphire and Steel story. Sapphire and Steel, a slightly more obscure ITV sci-fi series that's terrific. David McCallum and Joanna Lumley as time agent type things, and no one really understands what's going on in it, but it's brilliant. And that was the first one I did, and I think that was about 2 years beforehand. But I wasn't writing regularly for the company until about 2 years afterwards, and that's when I sort of take it from, really, when I actually moved from being a guy who'd done a Sapphire and Steel to a Big Finish writer. Coming up now, we are coming up to the Tesco's, which I remember being built. I can't remember what was there before, but I remember that when the Tesco's came in, it was all brand new and exciting, and it, you know, it doesn't look like that now, but because it's just the Tesco's and everyone's sort of used to it. And that was very early on in my life, so again, gives you a rough idea that it's been around about 35 years probably. This newsagent's here, I think, is actually where I first bought an issue of Doctor Who magazine, which again would have been, I know it's season 21, so that would place it as about 1984. And I think I bought like Return of the Jedi comic there, and all of those kind of things when I was sort of growing up and just interested in a lot of sci-fi. Doctor Who sort of lingered on, Star Wars less so, because I might wait for the car. Yeah, I kind of love Doctor Who in a way that I don't especially love. Oh, we might be getting waved across. That I don't especially adore. I like Star Wars, but Doctor Who is. I once joked to an ex-girlfriend that I thought Doctor Who was sort of the love of my life. I'm not sure I'm entirely joking when I say that. Oh, over there in the side there. Yeah, I mean, I think that footprint looks. Actually, there's another one next to it. That one, is that a Yeti footprint? It could be. Yeah, I suppose actually no, that's not entirely impossible, because I did think there were sightings in and around it. Because this is, you know, the Yeti did invade the London Underground in the 60s, and this Epping is the very far eastern end of the Central Line, and you know, I think one of them might have got lost when trying to escape the Great Intelligence's evil plan back in the 60s or the 70s, depending on how you argue about unit dating. Really, I would probably go 60s. Yeah, oh, fair play to them, you know. And if there have been Yeti wandering around, there is a lot of Epping forest to get lost in. Maybe Epping can have its very own Bigfoot equivalent. I always have upcoming Doctor Who projects on the res. I think at the moment, I was actually trying to do the maths on it. I think I'm probably got scripts to write through till about August at the moment, so that's about another 6 months. Some of those are theoretical. Some of those I just know what I'm supposed to be doing at some point before too long. It's not just Doctor Who. I mean, I've got one of the ones I've just finished that we're going to record in a few weeks probably is of a TV series called The Avengers, not the superhero Avengers, but John Steed and Mrs. Peel in the 60s, crime-fighting duo, and are great fun. And one of the sort of things that after I'd initially been a sort of a massive Doctor Who fan as a child, I saw an old episode of Steve and Mrs. Peel in Australia and began to realise, oh, hold on, I love other series as well, and this is all sort of a big grand thing now. Yeah, I think I'm just trying to do the maths in my head. I think I've got a Doctor Who spin-off to come next, and then after that the Avengers and another Doctor Who spin-off, then probably some more Doctor Who. In terms of stuff that's actually coming out this year, got again loads of. There's one called The Two Masters, which is having two different incarnations of the Master meet up and fight Sylvester McCoy's Doctor and try to stop the destruction of everything throughout history. I've got one with Tom Baker meeting one of the Doctor's old school friends, which is one I'm particularly proud of, that I wrote and was recorded about 2 years ago. The ridiculous thing about a lot of the stuff we do, we write stories for Tom Baker that we've banked up so many of those that I think one I wrote and had recorded last year isn't out till 2018. So yeah, loads always coming up. It's just because we've got loads we've recorded that are going to come out before then. We work in sort of like 8-story seasons, and then in particular with Tom is just desperately keen to come into the studio. He loves doing it. We love working with him. So we're going to just keep writing stories for him and keep recording them. And we just happen to have got quite far in advance of ourselves, really. So yeah, Tom Baker loves doing them. On a recording day, Tom goes into the studio and you struggle to get him out. You go, do you want a break, Tom? No, I'm fine. I keep going. Do you want a break? No, I'll just power through. We love Tom, and he's great. He's a very entertaining man. And all the actors, actually, that's the great thing as well. When you see actors, and it doesn't matter how famous the actors are, how award-winning or well-regarded they are, they come into the room and they sit in the room with Tom Baker and they just feel that this is their dream come true. Particularly if they're actors of a certain age, you watched him as a kid growing up, but also everyone knows the man's iconic, and he's just brilliant, yeah. No, Tom is enthusiastic, and he's also kind of very almost evangelical about us now, because he used to not record them for years, and then I can't remember when it was, maybe 5 years ago, he started deciding, maybe I will do this, and came in and started recording with us, and then just going, now he just says, I was a fool for years, I should have been doing this all the time. I kind of almost, in my head, I do impressions of the Doctors when I'm writing them. I mutter the lines out loud to myself when I'm writing to check that they're sayable and they sound like him, and a lot of the time I will do impressions of the characters. So Tom Baker I can roughly do, Peter Davison less so. I think if I was writing one for, say, these characters called Jago and Lightfoot, who is sort of the spin-off one, I would do those. I kind of have one who's always like, yes, Professor, I've been walking down the street doing this or whatever I've been doing. Well, very much, Henry, I'm so sorry, that's an awful... And it just, if you do them in the voices, if you kind of... It's one of the things that's quite useful in terms of the writing with a lot of the stuff we do. We are writing for specific actors, and you kind of hear in your head that voice, and you can sort of imagine how it comes out. And so sometimes if you're writing for other people, you just imagine actors to write it. I've been writing a villain recently, and I've mentally cast him as a particular actor who I don't think it's going to be, because it's a little bit too on the nose for for the role. But it just helped me having a consistent voice for the character and his consistent style of speaking. Henry Gordon Jago is the theatrical impresario in Victorian England who runs various theatres, the Palace Theatre in the story, the Italians of Wang Chiang, and the New Regency in the audios. And Professor George Lightfoot is a pathologist, and they both turned up in this story called, as you say, called The Talons of Wang Chiang. They only met in episode 5 of it, but everyone kind of views them as a double act, and they kind of love them. And there was apparently talk of them being a spin-off back in the day when the story was on, but nothing ever happened of it. They're just very well written. Everyone kind of loves them because they're both very contrasting characters, but very complementary characters, because George is quite sort of posh and a little bit uptight, and Henry's very exuberant. And there was a sort of a one-off audio written with the two of them for a series we do called The Companion Chronicles, which reunited them for the first time in 40 years. And they just had a blast doing it, and we really like working with them. So I just kept asking them back. They are two of the nicest actors you could possibly work with. As I said, they turn up in this one, The Justice of Jalxar, when I was asked to do the Meeting Tom again, and I just get asked. That's the thing. I don't ever kind of put my name forward for these things, but it's just nice when, because the producers like what I do, they keep asking me back to do other things, and yeah, I got asked to do a couple for them, and I kind of want to do another one, but I haven't had the time or to do something with the other things we've been doing, so it'd be nice to go back to them again, because they are wonderful, and the actors are lovely. Yeah, up ahead, on the left, there's Smith's Fish and Chip Shop, which I remember was always a place to get fish and chips from. We used to have a sort of family tradition. If we moved house, we'd always go out and buy fish and chips, or if somebody in the family, like my gran, moved house or whatever. And it took me a very long time to realise that there's something rather insane about having a family tradition for when you move house. My parents moved house remarkably often, which is slightly bizarre. But actually, the other place I'm kind of coming up to here that is sort of very formative for me is actually sadly shut down now, and but only very recently been shut down. We're just quickly crossing the road carefully. Yeah, you can still see the sign for the Epping bookshop. Again, I don't think that's changed in my memory. And the Epping bookshop has literally only just closed down this year, after having had something like, must have been 30 or 40 years service. Yeah, and a sign at the front saying, "We are now closed. Thank you to all our customers for your years of loyalty and friendship." This is where I would spend a lot of time, pretty much basically reading books and treating it as if it was a library, while my mum was in the Tesco's next door, and sort of fostered my love of reading. I got some of my earliest sort of Doctor Who novelisations here, which I would read through avidly. If I just kind of glance through the window there a bit, there used to be sort of like a little kind of car thing for the kids section, where it was a sort of a big shelving unit that had been sort of half converted into a car, sat right in the middle there, and I would just sit there and read and just be treated as a loyal and regular customer. So I've always been fond of it, and I love the fact that it's managed to survive this long. So there isn't like a Waterstones in town. There isn't anywhere else you would buy books here, and so this was such a sort of beautiful and strong part of the community for years. So it's a bit of a shame no one's taken over and made a bookshop of their own out of it, but at the same time it's also really amazing and brilliant that it managed to last this long as an independent bookshop until the people who run it just wanted to retire and move on, I think, which is obviously exactly what they're allowed to do. Actually, because I think it's a bit of an odd. I mean, as I say, just beyond where the car would have been, there's something that is that a statue? What's a statue doing in a? Actually, just move away slowly. Move away slowly. Don't just keep looking that way, but just move away slowly, so we don't. Yeah, just don't turn around. Don't turn around. Just keep going. Just keep going. Yeah, there we go, and run. There's no set route really. I think the best way of doing it is just to sort of keep writing. I think the more you write, the better you get at it. But that's the thing, you kind of learn from your mistakes. I think my general advice to authors, there are a few things. One is, this will sound slightly facile, but piece number one is start writing. And advice piece number two is stop writing. So you start if you have an idea for something, make sure you just start it. You can have an idea lingering in the back of your head for years and never get around to doing it. The moment you start doing it, it just becomes easier. The moment you start writing anything, it begins to come together in your head as well. And then just drive through to the end and finish it. That's the second bit. And both of those are so much harder to do than they sound. I talk about the tyranny of the blank page, because seeing something blank where you've just got to figure out a way of starting it, it will always just seem like, well, what's the perfect opening line? Don't worry about that for the moment. Just start something, keep going with it. And it'll all sort of come together eventually. And then actually just ploughing through until you've got a complete product is also important. I think as well that I think people also slightly forget, almost with doing any of these things, that anything you see that's been written, or particularly like with novels as well, I think this particularly happens with prose writers, is that you kind of judge your first draft and your first sentence against every book you've ever seen, and you forget that these writers have had editors to work with, and they've had people and feedback on their first drafts, and they've honed it and shifted it, and you end up trying to write the first page over and over again and make it perfect, when give it a bit of time. If you just keep trying to get the first page perfect, you're never going to write page 2. And people have to develop. And again, if you have to throw away the very first thing you wrote and never have anyone see it, as long as it's completed, you've learnt something from that. In terms of actually once you've actually started writing these, I think entering competitions, finding people to submit your work to is always useful. As I say, that's how I got my radio sketch thing, and I had a play at the Royal Court in about 2000 as a young writer, which I was very proud of. People are always going to look for plays and things to do, and they're going to look for writers. And the good thing about writing, as opposed to saying being a filmmaker or something like that, is you can basically do it for free. All you need is, well, you don't even need a pad and pen anymore. Everyone's sort of got a computer. You can just do it on a computer electronically, and it doesn't cost you anything really, apart from a bit of time. And you can just hone what you're doing, make it work, and send it out to people, and then finish something, and then start something new, and just keep going until somebody notices, really.